Hi, it's Dr. Bob, and today we are at the Bean Museum, which is the Life Sciences Museum at Brigham Young University in Provo, Utah. We're here to look at their Human Origins exhibit and to understand how universities all over the country are presenting this idea of human origins and the concept of evolution of humans. It's interesting because as you look at universities all across the country, the top tier, even the religious schools, top tier religious schools across the country, all have an affiliation or association with a museum that has an exhibit similar to this one. It's interesting that this one is here right on campus. That tells us a lot about what's going on in these universities, because why would a religiously affiliated university choose to adopt an approach that is so anti-biblical? Well, the real reason is the acceptance of the university by the scientists and the scholars of the world. And that's the same thing that's happened here, where the door is open to allow more liberal professors and teaching in order to gain acceptance from the broader world. And so we're going to go in and we're going to see just how human origins is presented in an exhibit like this one and how it relates to us and what it says about the worldview of the universities that present these type of exhibits. This exhibit presents this idea of human evolution in a very unique way. Notice that the fossil skulls that are presented here are presented on a family tree type model. And of course you see all these kids going around, everybody wants to see how they fit in this grand scheme and where their place is on this family tree. Kind of reminiscent of a genealogical. These skulls represent a lot of different approaches. You'll see here Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy. And of course, Lucy was presented by Donald Johanson as being the kind of the epitome of a human origins candidate. And yet now we know that Lucy was just simply an ape. As we go to Cro-Magnon man up here, Cro-Magnon man is human. And Neanderthal, of course, is human. Each of these, like when you look at your own DNA, you'll see that you'll have a percentage of your DNA that they might say that you're like 3% Neanderthal. All that really is indicating is just like you're 3% European, or some percentage of your ancestry comes from a specific region or area, and that's exactly where Neanderthal fits. In this exhibit, evolution is presented as if it's factual. In fact, the statement that they make here is the theory of evolution is not someone's guess. The theory describes a well-established and documented scientific process, even though that's not the case. Now, some of the scientific processes that they point to as being indicative of evolution are things like homology and embryo development, all things which have been disproven. And we know that they're not indications of an evolutionary process, but simply indications of a creator God who created each of us out of the same materials to exist in the same environment. And so what we really get a chance to see is how these philosophies of men, this religion of evolution, has now become entrenched in new temples that are represented by these universities all over the country. Now, why would this model be presented in a university like this? Well, it's simply to gain the acceptance of the world, but it also allows for a lot of other philosophies and ideas to intrude on the things that are taught here. So evolution isn't simply something that's taught in the biology or science classes. It intrudes into philosophy, into sociology, into anthropology. And so we start getting these ideas of primitive man and the development of ideas, instead of looking at us as being creators or creatures of a creator. It's interesting as we look at this that you see all these children going around. They all want to figure out where they fit in this world, and it's being presented as if it's factual, and it's being presented as if it is, even in this case, because we're talking about religious schools adopting this, that it is consistent with faith, implying that God hasn't spoken on his creation and that he hasn't already told us how he did this and why he did it. So this really calls into question a lot of those things. Now, each of these skulls, as we go through, all the Australopithecus supposed ancestors have all now been indicated to be ape ancestors, and many of the others are considered to be simply human. But when we look at the variety of the skulls and the fragmentary evidence that's available for these, they kind of give us an idea that there is a pattern or a path that's created here because of the way that they are presented on this chart. But they are not indicative of evolutionary processes, but more indicative of a worldview of the people who built the exhibit and the scientists that have supported this type of philosophy. It's interesting because even Richard Dawkins, he has a famous quote where he said that the only problem with evolution being adopted by more people is they don't have imagination. Because it does require imagination. You'll notice most of the methods that are used here are cartoon creations because there isn't any hard evidence to point to for these ideas. In Darwin's 100th anniversary publication of Origin of the Species, there's a great quote, and it simply points to the fact that while there's no evidence to support, and this was in 1959, while there's no evidence to support evolution and its scientific viability, it is still presented and supported because the alternative is untenable. The idea that a creator God would have made us is unacceptable to this group, to these scientists. And so now it's found its way into even religious schools and causing the great divide that we've seen as Satan's war has encroached on these religious schools. So when we look at this stuff, it's reasonable to say, why do they believe that? What evidence actually points to the assumptions and the conclusions that they're making? And is it valid? And as we'll see as we go through this exhibit, there is no validity to the things that are being taught. They are simply assumptions, they are guesses, and they support a worldview that is anti-God. This portion of the Human Origins exhibit here at the Bean Museum presents a completely discredited version of the science for human development. As you'll see up here, first off, it's talking about during fetal development, all vertebrates have gills and tails, which is now known to not be true. Of course, it goes back to Haeckel's diagrams, but it's been eradicated from most biological textbooks, except when you're talking about kids, apparently. And then the same thing with homology. As we look at these different constructions of bones and everything, this idea that you can support evolution through homology has again been discredited. And the idea that the relationship that we have to each other physiologically and the commonality, that somehow that is support for evolution, again, is not supported by the actual science, but is more indicative of a creator using the same materials to create creatures that are going to live in the same environment. Okay, as we look here at the skeletons that have been created for each of these fossils, of course, Australopithecus afarensis, Lucy, gets prime billing again, in spite of and showing her walking bipedally, in spite of the fact that the scientific evidence now points to the fact that she was a quadruped, not bipedal. In fact, the hip bones that are represented there, of course, they've reconstructed with the gray material, bone that was never found. But even the part that is a cast of the original bones that were found had to be modified to give it the characteristics of being able to walk in an upright position. When it was first discovered by Donald Johansson's team, it was flared upright like a chimpanzee. That's the record that we have. And there's a famous National Geographic video that shows them with a Dremel tool grinding it to get it back into place to where now it would be able to support a bipedal creature. So again, no indications that it was bipedal, but we still have it represented here in the museum as bipedal. Homo ergaster, presented as a hominid ancestor, but no indicating support for that. Homo neanderthalis, of course, the Neanderthal, of course, we know is just simply us. And then Homo sapiens, but it is great because they do show the skeletons of the chimpanzees as well. And as you look at Lucy in comparison to the bonobo and to the chimpanzee, you realize there's a much greater relationship between those than there is between Australopithecus afarensis and a Homo sapien. In fact, Australopithecus, all of that group has now been pretty clearly indicated to be ape-like and not hominids. So one more example here at the Bean Museum of human evolution being presented as factual and even misrepresenting the orientation of the skeletons in order to further that message. Of course, Lucy was even found over a several square mile area, implying that all those bones were somehow related to the same animal. So an interesting presentation, obviously with an agenda that is unique from the actual factual evidence, but more to support a worldview. And so we have to ask, what worldview is that? And it's an anti-God worldview where things simply happen on their own self-determination of material and of organisms through the evolutionary processes. This is Dr. Bob here at the Human Origins exhibit in Provo, Utah.